So the year is 2015, and we open on Westchester, Pennsylvania, at a very nice mansion. And in front of that mansion is a young man, and he is leaning on kind of a low-slung Japanese import car that is in very good condition, even though it's a little older. And so basically at that point, the young man is standing, kind of leaning against his car, and a young woman actually starts circling around the mansion, around the outside of the mansion, specifically around the bushes area, the bushes in front of the mansion itself. And so Shen just kind of so the young man smiles to himself, and this young girl is, kind of making her way along the edge of the mansion, and she looks up, and she heads over and she says, "Who are you?" And so he says, "My name is," he says, "Hi, I'm Shen Xinhui." And she says, "Why are you here?" And he says, "Well, I drove my grandfather, Queen Xinhui, here to sell medicine to your mother." And so the girl's eyes grow big, and he goes, he says, "And that means I already know who you are. I'm guessing you're Annie, correct?" So Annie says, "Yeah, that's a little weird. How do you know my name?" He says, "Well, I know most of the people who most of the people who are connected to the people that my grandfather sells herbs to." And she says, "Herbs?" And he says, "Yeah, come on, you must know my grandfather." And she goes, "Oh, your grandfather's the one who sells all that Chinese crap, right?" And he says, "Well, it's actually," he says, "he is a master of traditional Chinese medicine." And she says, "Oh, well, I have to say, that's a little frustrating. I think he's kind of ripping my mom off. I'm not sure that stuff is helping her at all." And he says, "Well, many people do discount the efficiency of traditional Chinese medicine, but I can tell you right now, my grandfather does not sell to anyone who has not sought him out and asked him to sell herbs to them." And she says, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, absolutely." And she says, "And he does house calls?" All right, and he says, "That's absolutely correct. We have a shop in the city, but," he says, "for special customers, I'm his delivery guy, and I bring him out, and actually he can see the person's space, because sometimes there's issues in the home that affect the medicine that he gives them." And she says, "Well, my name is Annie. It's nice to meet you." And so she shakes his hand. And Shen says, "It's very nice to meet you too." And she goes, and so at that point, Shen says, how did you not know my grandfather was in the house?" And so she looks, Annie kind of looks a little embarrassed. And she says, "Well, it's kind of a really large house, and it has more than one entrance and more than one exit. So I must not have seen, I really haven't seen my mother all day. So I'm sorry, I didn't see your grandfather in there." He says, "Well, that's okay." He says, "But why are you looking around the bushes of this house?" And she goes, "Oh my gosh, it's terrible. I lost my cell phone," right? And Shen just kind of shakes his head. "Yes, that's a big problem," right? And so he pulls out his cell phone. And he goes, "I don't know what I'd do without my cell phone." He says, he says, "I get frustrated when it's not charged for 20 minutes. That's a real problem." And so Annie says, "Yeah, it's a serious problem." And he goes, "How long has it been missing?" She goes, "It's been missing for about 2 days now." And he says, "Well, yeah, that's a terrible problem. I'm really sorry to hear that." And so she says, yeah, it's really frustrating. So anyway, I better get back to looking." And so Shen, kind of leans back on his car again, and he says, so Annie goes over, starts to go back to the bushes, and she looks through the bushes around for a while, and she looks back over at Shen, and she says, Really, you're not going to help me look in the bushes for my phone?" And Shen kind of sighs, and he goes, he says, "I can help you find your phone, right?" And Annie says, Really? Yeah, that would be helpful. Come on over. Let's start looking. Right? And he goes, no. You're looking in the wrong places. He says, I can do this a lot more efficiently. So she says, you can? He says, sure. He says, Gans can find it. And so Annie says, well, who's Gans? And he says, all right, you want me to help you find your phone? And she says, yes. And she says, all right, well, I'm more than willing to do that. But never again will you refer to traditional Chinese medicine as Chinese crap. And he says, traditional Chinese medicine is serious business. My grandfather Qing is a master at it. He studied all the relevant books, and he has wisdom that comes from many of our ancestors, right? And he says, so you're going to give my grandfather Qing proper respect, and you're going to give traditional Chinese medicine proper respect. Agreed? And she goes, well, you haven't produced anything yet, but if you can find my phone, I will never speak an ill word of your grandfather Qing or traditional Chinese medicine again. And so Shen goes, okay, let's find your phone. All right. He says, all right. So at that point, he walks around his car and he opens up the passenger side door. And so Annie comes over and she goes, whoa, why is your passenger side door on the left side of your car? And he goes, oh yeah. He says, this is a 1987 Honda CRX with about 100 hours of labor on my part. He says, those are custom rims. And he says, yeah, of course. And he says, so, since this is a classic CRX, this is, it's important to understand that, of course, it's JDM, it's Japanese domestic market, right? And so she goes, that's a lot of gobbledygook. I have no idea what you're saying, but that's a very nice car. And so at that point, Annie looks into the car, and she's far more shocked to see what is sitting on the seat in the car than the fact that the passenger seat is on the left side of the car. And so at that point, her eyes go wide, and out steps a goat. And Shen says, Annie, this is Gans. Gans, this is Annie. And so Annie kind of stoops down. She gets a big smile on her face, and she just kind of strokes, the fur under Gans's throat. And she says, why do you have a goat? And he says, well, Gans is a very special member of our family. So my grandfather Qing, he's had this goat for longer than I've been alive. This goat's been in our family for a long time. It's a really special goat, right? And Annie says, what? How is this a special goat? And he goes, well, Gans can help you find lost things, right? And she says, how could a goat help you find lost things? He says, well, I'm going to trust you with a secret, Annie. He says, Gans actually is inhabited by my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And he says, and he reacts when people tell lies in front of him, and he can find lost things. And she says, well, wait. If Gans has your grandmother inside of him, why do you refer to him as he? And he says, well, if you look at Gans, you'll see that he is a male goat, but he's inhabited by my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And she goes, oh, okay, well, this all sounds really crazy, but I'll tell you right now, if you find my phone, you'll have no objections from me. And he says, no problem. All right, he says, Gans, and he snaps his fingers, and Gans begins to walk around the house. So Gans walks all the way around the mansion. And Shen and Annie go with Gans. And so they walk all the way around the mansion. And at that point, Gans gets to the point, goes back to the car, and he stamps his hoof down on the ground, and he shakes his head, right? And at that point, Shen says, no, your phone isn't here. It's not here at the house.